Hello. The text came in just after midnight, right when I was about to hit the pillow. You should check on your wife. She's not where she says she is. At first, I thought I was seeing things. Maybe exhaustion was messing with my head. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the screen again. The words were still there, glowing in the dark like some kind of warning. I sat up in bed, my heart knocking against my ribs. Probably a wrong number. Or some scammer fishing for a reaction. But something about it made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't ignore. Emily, my wife of 24 years, had told me she was staying at her friend Karen's house tonight. Supposedly a girls' night, wine, gossip, and some reruns of their favorite crime dramas. A tradition they kept up a few times a year. I'd never questioned it before. Why would I? Emily wasn't the kind of woman who needed checking up on. She was responsible, predictable. The kind of woman who always reminded me to take my vitamins and texted me when she got home safe from the grocery store. But this text. This one-line grenade thrown into my otherwise peaceful night, it wasn't random. I stared at the message, debating whether to reply. If it was a scam, answering would just confirm that my number was active. But if it wasn't? The thought sent a chill through me. Instead of texting back, I did something I had never done before. I checked. I climbed out of bed, grabbed my phone charger, and plugged it into my truck's USB port as I slipped behind the wheel. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that made me feel like I was already waking up in a nightmare. The drive to Karen's place was short, 10 minutes, tops, but my head was spinning the entire way. I told myself I was being paranoid. That this was all some dumb prank. That Emily would be exactly where she said she was, curled up with a glass of red wine, talking about which actors they'd leave their husbands for. But then why did I feel like I already knew that wasn't the case? When I pulled up to Karen's house, I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, watching the dim glow from the living room window. If Emily was inside, I'd feel like an idiot. If she wasn't. I didn't let myself finish that thought. Instead, I stepped out of the truck and walked up to the front door. I knocked, waited. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I shifted my weight, debating whether to leave. Maybe they were asleep. Maybe Karen would be pissed if I woke them up. Then, just as I was about to turn around, the porch light flicked on. A moment later, the door opened, and Karen stood there in a robe, blinking at me in confusion. "Ethan," she said, rubbing her eyes. "What are you doing here?" I studied her face, trying to read between the lines. "Is Emily here?" Karen frowned. "No. I haven't seen her all night. She told me she wasn't feeling well and had to cancel." The world shifted beneath my feet. "What?" "She texted me a few hours ago," Karen said, yawning. "Said she had a migraine. I figured she just went home early." "Did something happen?" I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "No, nothing. Sorry to wake you." Karen gave me a puzzled look but didn't press further. "All right. Hope everything's okay." She closed the door, and I stood there on the porch, my heart pounding. Emily had lied. And someone wanted me to know. The drive back home felt longer than it should have. Every red light felt like it lasted an eternity. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting another message, but nothing came. Where the hell was she? I gripped the wheel tighter, my mind running through the possibilities. Was she with a friend? At a hotel? Did something happen to her? Or was she with someone else? The thought made my stomach lurch, but I forced it down. No. That wasn't Emily. It couldn't be. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. The house was dark, exactly as I had left it. No sign of her car. I stepped inside, flipping on the lights. Nothing looked out of place. I checked the kitchen, the bedroom, even the bathroom, empty. I pulled out my phone and called her. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. A creeping sense of dread settled in my chest. Something was wrong. I checked the phone records next. We shared a plan, so I could see every call and text she made. One number stood out: repeated calls, always late at night. I copied it down. Then, against every instinct, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I got back in my truck and started driving. Not aimlessly. Not in blind panic. But to an address I had just found in the GPS history of her car. An address she had visited multiple times in the past month. A place I had never been. A place I was about to see for myself. The drive to the mystery address was a blur. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was anything but. I didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to believe that my wife, my Emily, was capable of this. But the facts didn't care about my feelings. She wasn't at Karen's. She had lied about where she'd be. Someone had sent me that message for a reason. And now, I was about to find out why. The address took me across town to a neighborhood I wasn't familiar with. Not a bad part of the city, but not somewhere Emily had ever mentioned. The houses were older, modest. A row of bungalows with dim porch lights and driveways full of sleeping cars. I slowed as I approached the house in question. It was a single-story home with dark blue siding and a small front yard. A car was parked in the driveway, not Emily's. A silver sedan. The porch light was off, but the faint glow of a lamp shone through the curtains. Someone was home. I pulled to the curb, cutting the engine, and sat in the dark cab of my truck. I should have been shaking with rage, but instead, I felt cold. Detached. I needed to see. Needed proof. Emily had left no room for trust tonight. I grabbed my phone, took a deep breath, and dialed her number again. Straight to voicemail. I stared at the house, my jaw tightening. Then, as if to confirm everything I feared, the front door opened. A figure stepped out. Not Emily. A man. Tall. Maybe mid-30s. Dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt. He stood on the porch, stretching like he had just woken up from a nap. Then he pulled out his phone and checked something on the screen before stepping back inside and closing the door. That was all the proof I needed. Emily was inside. I felt like someone had just poured concrete into my chest. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. What now? Do I storm in? Bang on the door and demand answers? Do I sit here like a fool, watching my marriage collapse in real time? No. I wasn't about to make a scene. Not yet. I needed to be smart. If she had been lying about this, what else had she been lying about? I checked the time, 12:43 a.m. She wasn't going to be leaving anytime soon. That meant I had time to find out just who this man was. I drove 3 blocks away and parked in an empty lot behind a 24-hour gas station. Then I got to work. First, I ran the phone number I had found on our call log through a reverse lookup site. It wasn't instant, but within a minute, a name popped up. Daniel Reyes. No bells rang. I didn't know any Daniel Reyes. Next, I ran the address. The house was owned by the same name. So this wasn't some hotel room or a random meetup spot. This guy, Daniel, lived here. My stomach turned. How long had this been going on? How often had she been coming here while I was out working, oblivious? I opened up my GPS history again. 5 visits in the last month. That was just what I could see. Who knew how many times she had been here before that? I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. This wasn't some one-time mistake. Some moment of weakness. This was routine. I had been played. I stared at my phone, considering my next move. A text from her would have been nice. A lie, even. Something to tell me she hadn't completely given up pretending. But there was nothing. She was comfortable enough to not even bother covering her tracks anymore. And that? That stung more than the betrayal itself. I wasn't just losing my wife. I had already lost her. And she didn't think I was smart enough to notice. But that wasn't enough. I didn't just want to know what she was doing. I wanted to know why. So I made a decision. I was going to follow her. The next time she left, I'd be right behind her. No more guesswork. No more wondering. I was going to see this through to the bitter end. And when I did, Emily and Daniel wouldn't even see it coming. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Home was where Emily and I had built a life together. A life that, as of this moment, felt like nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. The thought of going back to our bedroom, crawling into the bed we had shared for years, made my skin crawl. Instead, I parked outside a rundown diner that had no business being open at 1 a.m. and ordered the strongest coffee they had. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely acknowledged me as she set the mug down. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice hoarse from what I assumed was years of smoking. I looked up at her. "You could say that." She nodded like she'd heard that line 1,000 times before and walked away. I took a sip of the coffee. It tasted like burnt rubber, but I drank it anyway. I needed to stay awake. Because tonight, I wasn't just a betrayed husband. I was a man on a mission. I sat in that diner for 2 hours, my mind spinning through the past, searching for missed signs. Had Emily been distant lately? Not really. If anything, she had been the same as always. Loving, attentive. No drastic changes. Which meant, she was good at this. That thought sat heavy in my gut. How long had she been lying to me so effortlessly? How many nights had I kissed her goodbye before heading off to work, completely unaware that as soon as I was gone, she was with him? I needed to know the truth. The whole truth. And I was going to get it. By the time the diner kicked me out at 4 a.m., I had a plan. I wasn't going to do anything impulsive. I wasn't going to barge into that house and start throwing punches. That was what a dumb man would do. No. I was going to be smart. If Emily thought she could play me for a fool, I was about to prove her very, very wrong. Part 4, Setting the Trap. I got home around 4:30 a.m. Emily still wasn't there. That told me everything I needed to know. For the first time in 24 years, she hadn't even bothered coming home. I felt the rage bubbling up again, but I forced it down. Not yet. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her neatly arranged side. Her book was still on the nightstand, a folded sweater draped over the chair in the corner. Everything looked normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I glanced at my phone. Still no texts from her. Still no calls. I exhaled slowly, then stood and walked over to her closet. I pulled the door open and scanned the racks of neatly hung dresses and jackets. My eyes landed on her work bag, sitting on the floor where she always kept it. I reached down, unzipped it, and pulled out her planner. Emily was old school like that, she never trusted phone apps for scheduling. Everything was written down, every meeting, every appointment. I flipped through the pages. Then I found it. The name, Daniel. The same name I had found in the phone records. But this wasn't just some scribbled note. It was everywhere. Once a week, sometimes twice. Meetings that had nothing to do with work. Lunches. Dinners. Appointments. The earliest one went back 7 months. 7 months. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. This wasn't just a fling. It was a second life. And I had been too blind to see it. I spent the next 2 days watching her. She didn't know I had found her planner. Didn't know I had access to her call history. Didn't know that every time she left the house, I was right behind her, tracking her every move. And what I learned. It made me sick. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Tuesday afternoon, she told me she had a meeting with a client. I followed her from a distance, staying a few cars back. She didn't go to any meeting. She drove straight to his house. Again. For 2 hours, I sat parked down the street, watching as she walked inside like she belonged there. Like it was her home. At one point, Daniel stepped outside to grab something from his car. I watched him closely. He wasn't better than me. He wasn't taller. He wasn't stronger. He wasn't richer. He was just some guy. And yet, he had something of mine. No. He didn't have it. She had given it to him. That was the part that burned. I could have sat there all day, stewing in my own anger, but I forced myself to stay focused. I was gathering evidence. Not just for me. For what came next. That night, Emily came home around 8 p.m. She walked into the house like nothing had happened. I watched her from the couch as she kicked off her shoes, set down her purse, and stretched. Then she turned and smiled at me. Smiled. "Hey, babe," she said. "How was your day?" I stared at her. For a moment, I considered answering like I always did. "Fine. Busy. Same old, same old." But something in me snapped. Instead, I pulled out my phone and slid it across the coffee table. She frowned. "What's this?" "Go ahead," I said, my voice calm. "Take a look." She hesitated, then picked up the phone. I had left the screen open to a photo. A photo of her and Daniel. From today. Walking into his house. Hand in hand. The blood drained from her face. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set the phone back down. She didn't speak. Didn't even try to make up an excuse. And in that silence, I saw the truth in her eyes. She knew it was over. I leaned back against the couch, studying her reaction. "Do you have anything to say, Emily?" She swallowed hard. "Ethan, I held up a hand. "Don't." She closed her mouth. For the first time in 24 years, I saw my wife for what she really was. A stranger. A liar. A traitor. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, then stood up. "I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow." And then, without another word, I walked past her, grabbed my keys, and left. I didn't go far. After leaving the house, I parked at a gas station a few blocks away and just sat there. The night air was cool, but my skin was burning. My hands clenched and unclenched around the steering wheel, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my skull. I had thought, stupidly, that seeing Emily's reaction would give me some kind of closure. That catching her red-handed, watching the color drain from her face, would end this. It didn't. If anything, it made things worse. Because the woman who had looked me in the eye and vowed to love me until death had just stood there in silence, not fighting for us, not denying it, not even trying to lie. That's when I knew. There was more. So much more. And I wasn't done yet. Part 5, the phone call that changed everything. I don't know how long I sat in that truck, staring blankly at the neon sign of the gas station, before my phone buzzed. I expected it to be Emily. Maybe some pathetic attempt at damage control. Maybe another lie. But it wasn't. The number wasn't saved in my phone, but I recognized it instantly. Daniel Reyes. I answered without hesitation. Silence for a beat. Then. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." His voice was steady. Confident. Like he wasn't some home-wrecking piece of shit who had just been caught screwing another man's wife. Like he thought he still had control. I let out a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay level. "Funny," I said. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." Another pause. Then, a chuckle. Low. Amused. "You think this is just about your wife?" I froze. A creeping chill crawled up my spine. "What?" Daniel exhaled like he was bored of me already. "This is bigger than you, Ethan. Walk away while you still can." Click. The line went dead. I sat there, gripping the phone so tightly I thought I'd snap it in half. That wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And that meant one thing. Emily's betrayal wasn't just some affair. It was something else. Something deeper. Something dangerous. My heart pounded as I scrolled through my phone, opening the reverse lookup site I had used earlier. I ran Daniel's number again, searching for anything I might have missed. And that's when I found it. Buried in an old forum thread, tied to a different area code, was his name. Daniel Reyes, former financial analyst. Accused of fraud. Never convicted. A news clipping followed. Investigation abruptly dropped due to lack of evidence. But the comments told a different story. This guy had dirt on the wrong people. They buried the case before it could blow up. Rumor is, he launders money now. Runs under-the-table deals for people who don't want a paper trail. I read the last comment twice. If Daniel Reyes is in your life, it means someone is hiding something. My blood ran cold. I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife. I was dealing with something far worse. And Emily was right in the middle of it. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the next 6 hours digging into everything. Emily's finances. Her emails. Even her old work records. And piece by piece, the puzzle started fitting together. Emily had money she couldn't explain. Not a little, either. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Money that wasn't in our joint account. Money that wasn't from her salary. Money that had Daniel's name attached to it. My hands shook as I scrolled through the bank statements. What the hell had she gotten herself into? And why had she kept me in the dark? I checked the time. 6:45 a.m. Emily would wake up soon. And when she did, I wasn't going to waste my breath asking why she cheated. I was going to find out what the hell she was hiding. And if she thought Daniel Reyes was dangerous. She had no idea what I was willing to do. To her. To him. To anyone who had made a fool out of me. Because the old Ethan. The trusting husband. He was gone. And whoever these people thought they were playing with. They were about to find out the hard way. I don't lose. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. My mind was racing too fast, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Emily had been lying to me for months, maybe even longer. And it wasn't just the affair. That phone call from Daniel proved there was something deeper at play, something bigger than just my wife sneaking around behind my back. Money. Fraud. A cover-up. Whatever it was, Emily was in the middle of it, and I had been sitting there like an idiot, completely unaware. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to decide what to do next. I could storm back home, drag her out of bed, and demand answers, but I already knew how that would go. She'd deny it. She'd try to twist the truth, maybe even cry, act like I was crazy for accusing her. No. I needed something she couldn't lie her way out of. I needed proof, the kind that would shatter whatever act she was planning to put on when I confronted her. Instead of going home, I pulled into the parking lot of a coffee shop and started making calls. First, I reached out to an old friend from high school, Mark. He worked in IT security, the kind of guy who could hack into just about anything if given enough time. We hadn't talked much in recent years, but this wasn't the time for catching up. I told him I needed him to dig up everything he could on Daniel Reyes, his accounts, his connections, anything that wasn't public. Mark hesitated at first, but when I told him it was about my wife and an affair, he got quiet and then simply said, "I'll see what I can find." That was step 1. Step 2 was following the money. Emily and I had always kept joint accounts, but I knew she had a separate one for personal spending. What I hadn't realized was that this personal account had started seeing large, unexplained deposits over the past year. I dug deeper, scrolling through transactions, my pulse spiking as I saw the same amounts coming in every few weeks, always just under $10,000. It hit me all at once. 10,000. That was the federal threshold for banks to report suspicious activity. Anything over that would have drawn attention, but Emily, or whoever was behind this, was smart enough to keep the numbers just under the radar. I leaned back in my seat, exhaling slowly. She wasn't just cheating. She was hiding something big. The sun was starting to rise by the time I pulled into our driveway. Emily's car was there, sitting in its usual spot like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't spent the night in another man's bed. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. No turning back now. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me quietly, listening for any sign of movement. The house was silent. I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom and found her exactly where I expected, curled up under the covers, sleeping peacefully, as if she hadn't just set fire to our entire life. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her, feeling a mixture of rage and disbelief. How many times had I kissed her goodnight while she was already planning her next lie? I yanked the covers off the bed. Emily gasped, jerking awake. She blinked up at me in confusion, then realization dawned in her eyes. "Ethan." "Don't," I said, my voice sharp, colder than I thought possible. I held up my phone and played the voicemail from Daniel. The room filled with his voice, smooth and confident. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Walk away while you still can." I watched as the color drained from her face. "I'm only going to ask this once," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What the hell are you involved in?" Emily swallowed hard. I don't know what you mean." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know what I mean. Try again." "I know about Daniel. I know about the money. I know you've been sneaking out to see him for months. So why don't you cut the bullshit and tell me the truth for once in your goddamn life?" She sat up slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the bed like she was trying to steady herself. "Ethan, it's not what you think." That set me off. I slammed my fist against the dresser, making her jump. "Don't tell me it's not what I think. I've seen the proof, Emily. The bank deposits, the secret meetings, the late-night calls. You've been playing me for a fool. So start talking." She looked down, exhaling shakily. For a long moment, I thought she wasn't going to say anything at all. Then, finally, she whispered, "I didn't have a choice." I narrowed my eyes. "What does that mean?" Emily hesitated, then finally met my gaze. "Daniel, he's not just some guy, Ethan. He's dangerous. I got involved with him before I realized what he really was." I crossed my arms. "And what is he?" She looked away. "A fixer." I frowned. "A fixer for what?" "For people who need their problems to disappear." The room seemed to shrink around me. "What the hell does that mean, Emily?" She rubbed her arms, as if trying to warm herself. "Daniel works for powerful people. People who can't afford to have their mistakes traced back to them. He covers things up, money laundering, fake identities, sometimes worse. I didn't know at first. I thought he was just helping me invest some money on the side. But once I realized what he really did, I was already too deep. My stomach twisted. "And the money? The payments?" She closed her eyes. "I was helping move funds. That's all. Just transferring money between accounts, making sure it couldn't be tracked. I didn't think." I cut her off. "Didn't think what?" "That you'd get caught." Emily shook her head. "No. That it would lead to other things." My blood turned to ice. "What other things?" She swallowed. "There was a deal. Some of Daniel's clients, people with a lot to lose, were involved in something big. And I was helping them move the money to keep it quiet. But something went wrong. The numbers didn't add up. And now? Now what?" I pressed. Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Not guilt. Not regret. Fear. Now they think I stole from them. My heart pounded against my ribs. "How much?" She hesitated. Then. 200,000. I took a step back. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a betrayal. Emily had dragged us into something that could get us both killed. And if Daniel's phone call had been a warning, it meant they were already watching. I exhaled slowly, my hands curling into fists. This isn't just your problem anymore, Emily, I said, my voice low. You just made it mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if I was going to save my wife. Or destroy her. Emily sat on the bed, knees drawn to her chest, her fingers clutching the sheets like they were the only thing keeping her together. Her face was pale, her breath unsteady. But I didn't care. Not anymore. Whatever sympathy I had left for her had evaporated the second I found out the truth. She hadn't just cheated on me. She hadn't just lied. She had been used. And worse, she had let it happen. I stood across from her, my arms crossed, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and something I didn't want to admit felt like pity. Start talking, I said, my voice low, dangerous. Emily swallowed hard, looking at me with wide, guilty eyes. Ethan, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I slammed my fist against the dresser, making her flinch. I said, start talking. No more bullshit. She exhaled shakily, staring down at her hands. And then, finally, she spoke. It started small, she whispered. When I first met Daniel, he was just, charming. Confident. He made me feel important. I thought it was harmless, just flirting at first. But then, after a few months, he started telling me things about investments. Ways to make money, ways to help myself. He made it seem so easy, like it was just some game that only smart people knew how to play. I gritted my teeth. And you believed him. She looked up at me, her face twisted in something between shame and regret. I was stupid, she admitted. I thought he cared about me. I thought he saw me in a way you didn't anymore. That hit like a punch to the gut. But I didn't let it show. Emily took a deep breath and kept going. He didn't ask me to do anything at first. He just planted ideas. Made me think about things differently. About how money moves. About how people like him, people with power, use loopholes to get richer while everyone else struggles. And then, one day, he told me about an opportunity. A chance to be part of it. I narrowed my eyes. And you didn't think, for 1 second, that this was illegal? She let out a bitter laugh. Of course I did. But Daniel, he made it sound like it was normal. Like everyone did it. He told me I was special, that I was smart enough to understand the game. And I wanted to believe him. I clenched my fists. I had heard enough. You weren't special, Emily, I said coldly. You were a mark. A pawn. And you let him play you. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Because I wasn't finished. What happened next? I demanded. She hesitated, then wiped at her face and continued. He convinced me to open an account, she admitted. A private one, outside of our joint finances. He said it would just be for trial investments. But then he started having me move money. Small amounts at first. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. I didn't ask questions. I told myself it was fine. I shook my head. And then it wasn't small anymore, was it? She looked away. No, she whispered. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to contain the storm inside me. And the affair? I asked, my voice tight. When did that start? Emily flinched. Ethan. I grabbed the chair from the corner of the room, dragged it in front of her, and sat down, leveling my gaze with hers. Tell me, I said. She swallowed hard, then dropped her head into her hands. He used it against me, she said, voice muffled. The flirting, the charm, it wasn't real. It was a test. A way to see how far he could push me. I sat stone still, listening. I told myself it was my choice, she continued, voice hollow. That I was in control. But I wasn't. He knew exactly what he was doing. He made me feel like I owed him, like I had to prove my loyalty. And when things started getting worse, when the money started disappearing, he told me I had to stay close to him so he could protect me. I exhaled slowly. So he was blackmailing you. She nodded, her whole body trembling. Not directly. But I knew. I knew if I tried to walk away, he'd make sure I took the fall for everything. I leaned back in my chair, processing. Emily wasn't innocent. Not by a long shot. She had made her choices. She had betrayed me, over and over again. But Daniel? He had built this. He had found a weakness and exploited it. And now, Emily wasn't just a cheating wife. She was his hostage. I clenched my jaw. So let me get this straight, I said. You got involved in a laundering scheme. You started moving money for him. And then, when things went sideways, he used your affair to keep you in line. Emily wiped her face, nodding. I let out a slow, cold breath. You realize what this means, right? I asked. She hesitated. What? I leaned in closer, my voice like steel. You're expendable. Her breath hitched. If the cartel thinks you took their money, they'll come after you. And if Daniel thinks you're a liability? I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. He'll cut you loose. Her lips parted in silent horror. She had thought she was playing a game. She had thought she had control. But Daniel had never loved her. He had used her. And now, if I didn't act fast, she wasn't just going to lose her marriage. She was going to lose everything. I stood up, grabbing my keys off the dresser. Where are you going? Emily whispered. To fix this, I said. She shot to her feet, grabbing my arm. Ethan, please. You can't go after him. He's dangerous. I shook her off. Yeah. I said, stepping toward the door. Well, so am I. She ran after me, panic in her voice. Ethan, listen to me. You can't win against him. I stopped in the doorway and turned back. My face was calm. My heartbeat was steady. Watch me. And then I walked out, slamming the door behind me. Daniel thought he had won. He thought he could take everything from me and walk away untouched. But he didn't know me. And by the time I was done with him, he'd wish he had never met either of us. I didn't storm into Daniel's house like a man on a mission for blood. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here for something more valuable, the truth. For the past year, he had been pulling the strings, making my wife believe she was someone special. He had made her feel important, irreplaceable, needed. He had whispered all the right things, convinced her she was too smart, too special to live an ordinary life with me. He had taken everything I built with Emily and twisted it into a weapon against me. And I was done playing his game. I parked a few houses down and walked up to his door, knocking like I was just another guest stopping by for a casual chat. I wanted him to answer without suspicion. To let me inside willingly. I didn't have to wait long. The door swung open, and there he was. Daniel Reyes. Up close, he wasn't impressive. He was my height, maybe a little thinner, with slick-back dark hair and the kind of arrogance you could smell a mile away. He had the look of a man who thought he had already won. Ethan, he said smoothly, leaning against the doorframe like we were old friends. Didn't expect to see you here. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Yeah, I figured it was time we had a talk. Man to man. His lips curled at the edges, amused. Man to man. He chuckled. I don't think we're playing the same game. I shrugged. Maybe. But I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. For a split second, I saw hesitation in his eyes. Then, just like that, it was gone. He stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. I walked past him into the house, taking in my surroundings. It wasn't a home, it was a setup. No family photos, no real personality, just expensive furniture placed perfectly, like it was staged for a magazine. Just like everything else about him. He shut the door behind me and folded his arms. All right, he said, since you came all this way, why don't you tell me what's on your mind? I turned to face him, keeping my stance relaxed. Let him think he still had control. You used her, I said simply. And I want to know why. Daniel tilted his head, playing dumb. Used to. I let out a small laugh. Come on. You know exactly who. Emily. He smiled, slow and deliberate. Ah. So she finally told you. I didn't react. I wanted to see how he played this. He sighed dramatically and walked over to a bar cart, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. Look, Ethan, he said, swirling the drink in his hand. I don't blame you for being upset. It's a tough pill to swallow, finding out your wife wanted something, more than what you could give her. I clenched my jaw but said nothing. She came to me, you know, he continued, watching me over the rim of his glass. Not the other way around. She was bored, Ethan. She wanted excitement, risk. A taste of something dangerous. And I gave it to her. I let him talk. Let him enjoy himself. Then I took a step closer. Yeah. I said, voice steady. And when exactly did you decide to turn her into your little pawn? His smirk didn't falter, but I saw the slight shift in his posture. I had hit the nerve. I kept going. You think I don't know how men like you work? You find women who are just discontent enough to listen. You tell them what they want to hear. You make them feel like they're finally waking up from the dull little lives they settled for. I took another step forward, watching his smirk finally start to fade. And then, when they trust you. When they're already too far in to walk away. That's when you use them. Daniel exhaled slowly, setting his glass down. You have quite the imagination. I laughed. Do I? Then why don't we talk about the money? His face remained impassive, but I saw the flicker of calculation in his eyes. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen, showing him the bank records. Emily's private account. The steady deposits. The movements, all traced back to him. His jaw tightened just slightly. If I hadn't been watching for it, I would have missed it. You convinced her to help move money, I said. Not because she was smart. Not because she was special. Because she was useful. A well-placed asset you could manipulate. He exhaled through his nose, but I wasn't done. You used her affair as leverage, I continued. Kept her close. Made sure she felt indebted to you. And now? Now that everything's falling apart, you're getting ready to disappear and let her take the fall. Daniel gave me a slow, mocking clap. Not bad, Ethan. You almost sound like you know what you're talking about. I stared him down. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Silence stretched between us. Then, slowly, he leaned against the counter and shook his head. You don't get it, do you? Get what? He sighed, rubbing his temple. Emily didn't love me, Ethan. She needed me. And the truth is, she still does. My stomach twisted. What the hell does that mean? It means, Daniel said, standing up straight, that if she has to choose between saving herself or saving you, he shrugged. You're not gonna like her answer. I went very, very still. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Emily had already lied to me. She had already betrayed me. What was stopping her from doing it again? Nothing. Daniel smirked. He knew I had figured it out. And in that moment, I hated him more than I had hated anyone in my entire life. But I wasn't going to let him win. I exhaled, slow and controlled. Then I put my phone back in my pocket, straightened my jacket, and smiled. You know what, Daniel? I said. You're right. He raised an eyebrow. Oh. Emily will choose herself. I nodded. But you? I laughed. You think you're untouchable. You think you can manipulate everyone around you. I leaned in slightly. But you forgot something, Daniel. He stared at me, waiting. I smiled wider. I'm not her. And then I turned and walked out of his house, leaving him standing there, watching me go. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't go home. Not yet. Not until I had everything I needed to bury Daniel Reyes and make Emily face the truth she had been running from. I parked outside a diner just off the highway, ordered a black coffee, and pulled out my phone. I had already made one call before, but now it was time to see what my old friend Mark had found. He was the best with digital footprints, the kind of guy who could pull up someone's entire life story with just a name and a phone number. I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring. "Ethan," he said, his tone serious. "I was about to call you." That made me sit up. "What did you find?" Mark exhaled. "You were right. This guy Daniel. He's bad news." I started with his financial records, what I could get my hands on, anyway, and it's a mess. He's been laundering money for at least 3 years through multiple shell companies. Fake real estate deals, offshore accounts, wire transfers just under the reporting limits. Classic scammer playbook. I clenched my jaw. And the money Emily moved, was it cartel money? Mark hesitated. "I can't say for sure, but there are connections. The accounts she helped move funds between. Some of them are linked to companies in Mexico. Known fronts. So yeah, it's possible." I rubbed my temple. Emily was way deeper into this than even she realized. "All right," I said. "What else?" Mark sighed. "Now, this is where it gets interesting. Daniel has done this before." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean he's pulled this exact con on another woman." The words hit me like a hammer. Mark continued. "I found records from 2 years ago. A woman named Rachel Torres. She worked in real estate, just like Emily. Guess what happened? She got involved with Daniel, started moving money for him, and then, poof. She took the fall when things went south. Ended up bankrupt. Lost everything." He wiped his hands clean and walked away without a scratch. I gritted my teeth. Daniel hadn't just manipulated Emily. This was his pattern. He found women who were looking for something more, made them feel like they were special, and then used them until they were no longer useful. And Emily, my wife, had been next on the list. Mark's voice lowered. "Listen, man. If you're gonna make a move, do it fast. This guy. He doesn't leave loose ends. And right now, Emily is a loose end." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I nodded to myself, gripping the phone. "Thanks, Mark. I owe you." "No, you don't," Mark said. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't do anything stupid." I exhaled. "No promises." I hung up and sat there for a moment, staring at my coffee as my thoughts raced. I finally had everything I needed. Daniel was a manipulator. A con artist. A man who had already destroyed at least one woman before Emily. And now, with the money missing and the cartel likely breathing down his neck, he was going to do the same thing to her. Throw her under the bus. Let her take the fall. She had betrayed me, lied to me, humiliated me, but as much as I hated her for it, I couldn't just let that happen. At least, not on his terms. I pulled up Emily's number and texted her. "We need to talk. Now." No response. Of course not. She was probably still with him. That was fine. Because by the time I was done, she wouldn't be able to ignore me anymore. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, then opened my email. Anonymous recipient. Screenshots of Daniel's transactions. A full breakdown of his laundering scheme. And then, I sent it, to the IRS and local law enforcement. Daniel wanted to play games. Let's see how well he played when the feds were breathing down his neck. I smirked, finished my coffee, and stepped out into the cold air. Now, it was time for the real fun to begin. I didn't go straight home. Not yet. I wanted to be there when it happened. I parked a few blocks away from Daniel's house, far enough that I wouldn't draw attention but close enough to watch. The street was quiet, only a few porch lights glowing in the early evening. I checked my watch. It wouldn't be long now. And then, right on time, the first black SUV pulled up. I leaned forward slightly, my pulse steady. The doors swung open, and two men in suits stepped out. Not cartel guys, feds. The second SUV arrived less than a minute later. Another set of agents. Another few moments of stillness. Then, they moved in. Daniel had no idea his world was ending tonight. I watched as they knocked on the door, firm and professional. A long pause. Then the door opened, and I could just barely make out Daniel's figure standing there, caught completely off guard. They talked for a few seconds. Then one of the agents flashed a badge. Daniel tried to shut the door. Big mistake. The agents pushed inside, and in the next few moments, I saw the familiar shape of a man being yanked forward, his hands wrenched behind his back. The street was silent, but I didn't need to hear the words. I knew exactly what was happening. Daniel Reyes, you're under arrest. I sat back in my seat, exhaling slowly as I watched them haul him out of his own house, his face twisted in shock and fury. There would be no smooth talking his way out of this one. The evidence I sent had been enough to open the door for the feds, but Mark had done even more damage. He had dug up enough dirt on Daniel to bury him alive. Fraud. Money laundering. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. I had made sure they had everything. Daniel thrashed once, trying to resist, but one of the agents forced him down against the hood of the SUV, reading him his rights. A part of me wanted to get out of the truck, walk right up to him, and look him in the eyes. I wanted him to see me standing there, watching as his life crumbled. But that wasn't necessary. He already knew. Even from where I sat, I could see the exact moment realization hit him. His gaze swept the street, looking for the person who had done this to him. And maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was real, but for a fraction of a second, his eyes landed on my truck. I smiled. He knew. And then, just like that, the moment was gone. They shoved him into the SUV, slammed the door shut, and just like that, Daniel Reyes was done. I watched them drive away, the red and blue lights flashing for only a few seconds before vanishing into the night. For the first time in a long time, I took a deep breath and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Emily was waiting for me when I got home. She had been crying. I could tell by the redness around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she stood there in the living room, clutching a blanket around her shoulders like it could protect her from what was coming. Ethan, she whispered. I shut the door behind me, walked past her, and sat down on the couch. I didn't speak for a long moment. She hesitated, then sat down across from me. What happened? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back, studying her. She still didn't know. I exhaled slowly. They arrested him. Her lips parted slightly, her face frozen in shock. What? The feds, I said. They raided his house tonight. Took him in. He's done, Emily. It's over. I watched the emotions flicker across her face. Shock. Fear. And then, relief. She had been terrified he would come after her. That once the cartel started breathing down his neck, he would throw her to the wolves to save himself. She thought he had been protecting her. She had been so wrong. I waited for her to speak. For her to say something, anything, that would justify what she had done. But all she said was, "You saved me." I let out a humorless chuckle. Yeah. I guess I did. She reached for my hand, and I let her. Her fingers were warm, but the feeling was empty. There was nothing left between us. We both knew it. She must have felt it, too, because her grip faltered. Finally, I looked at her. This is the last time, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her breath hitched. What do you mean? I pulled my hand away and stood up, running a hand through my hair. I mean, I'm done. I fixed your problem, just like I always have. I made sure you wouldn't take the fall for Daniel's mistakes. But that's it, Emily. We're done. Tears welled in her eyes. Ethan, please. No, I cut her off. Don't. Don't ask me to pretend like this didn't happen. Don't ask me to forgive you. Because the truth is, even if I could. I shook my head. I don't want to. She let out a quiet sob, pressing a hand to her mouth. I didn't look away. I wanted her to feel this. To know that for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't going to clean up her mess and then pretend like nothing happened. I walked to the door and grabbed my truck keys. I'll send the papers in the morning, I said. Take whatever you need from the house. I don't care. She stood abruptly, her whole body trembling. Ethan, please don't do this. I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, but... I turned to face her one last time. You didn't just hurt me, Emily, I said. You destroyed us. And now you have to live with that. She started sobbing, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out the door, climbed into my truck, and drove away without looking back. For the first time in 24 years, I wasn't carrying her problems on my shoulders anymore. For the first time in 24 years, I was free. And damn, it felt good. The divorce went through faster than I expected. Emily didn't fight it. She didn't ask for anything, not the house, not the savings, not even an explanation. It was like she knew there was nothing left to say. She packed her things, signed the papers, and walked out of my life without another word. I should have felt relief. Freedom. After everything she had done, after the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation, I should have been celebrating. Instead, I felt empty. The first few months were the hardest. Nights were the worst. I'd roll over in bed expecting to find her there, only to be met with cold sheets and silence. The house, once filled with the small background noises of shared life, her hairdryer in the morning, the clinking of her coffee cup, the occasional hum of an old song while she cooked, felt like a tomb. And the worst part? I missed her. Not the woman who lied to me. Not the woman who crawled into another man's bed. I missed who I thought she was. And that was the part one couldn't get past. I started seeing a therapist 6 months after the divorce. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who sat on a couch and spilled his guts to a stranger, but I wasn't handling it well. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating right. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to find the moment where it all went wrong. Dr. Lawson was blunt with me from day one. Ethan, she said during one session, folding her hands in her lap, you weren't trained for this. Men like you, hard-working, loyal, dependable, don't prepare for betrayal. Because you never expected it to happen. You never thought you needed to. I stared at the floor, rubbing my jaw. So what am I supposed to do? Just, get over it. She smiled slightly. No. You go through it. You let yourself grieve. You let yourself be angry, be hurt, be lost. And then, eventually, you come out the other side. I sighed, leaning back in the chair. How long does that take? She tilted her head. As long as it needs to. I didn't like that answer. But she was right. The first full year after the divorce felt like walking through quicksand. Some days were fine. Some days I couldn't even get out of bed. Memories would sneak up on me at the worst times, while driving, while making coffee, while folding laundry. But eventually, the pain became duller. I stopped checking her social media. Stopped wondering where she was, what she was doing. Stopped caring. The day I realized I hadn't thought about her in weeks was the day I knew I was finally getting better. Now, 2 years later, my life is simple. I still drive my truck. I still drink my coffee black. I still wake up early and go to bed late. But now, I sleep through the night without waking up in a panic. I go out with friends without feeling like I need to explain why I'm alone. I laugh more. I breathe easier. The scars are still there. They always will be. But they don't define me anymore. I'm not the man who got cheated on. I'm not the man who was betrayed. I'm just Ethan. And for the first time in a long time. That's enough. Bye bye.